The library closed at 9. Everyone in Harrowfield knew that rule, the way they knew the town's weather. Unpredictable, cold, and never quite honest. The Harrowfield Public Library sat between a bank and an empty cafe with a "For Lease" sign, bleached by years of sun. By day, it looked like any other civic building: brick, glass, banners about summer reading and local history exhibits. But at night, when the streetlights hummed and the town thinned into silence, the library looked like it was trying to remember what it used to be. Ethan Cole had told himself he was lucky to have this job. He said it in the mirror every morning while tying his tie, like a man rehearsing a role. Lucky, stable, quiet. After the divorce, after the move, after his friends stopped calling because they didn't know what to say anymore, he needed quiet more than anything. So he became the closing librarian. No one bothered you much when you worked evenings. The teenagers wandered in and out. The older regulars stayed on the second floor with newspapers and biographies, sneezing softly into the same pocket tissues. And the desperate ones, people like Ethan, people who were looking for something to hold on to without admitting it, sat in corners with books they didn't finish. Harrowfield wasn't a big place, and the library wasn't a big library, but it had a charm that felt sturdy. The ceiling arched high, the wood railings shone dull gold under the lamps, and the carpet held the smell of dust and rain like an old coat. On Ethan's first night, Mira Vasquez, the daytime head librarian, handed him a ring of keys heavy enough to make a point. "Most of these are for doors that don't matter," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "Boiler room, supply closet, archives." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Archives?" Mira nodded towards a narrow hallway behind the information desk. "Basement, old acquisitions, records, stuff no one checks out anymore." "Sounds exciting." "It's not." Mira hesitated, then added, "Don't go down there unless you have to. The motion lights are finicky, and it's easy to lose track of time." Ethan smiled politely, like people do when they hear something odd but don't want to make it weirder. "Right." Mira studied him the way librarians study a warped book spine, quietly assessing whether it could be fixed. "You'll do fine," she said finally. "It's just a building." Ethan kept that line in his pocket. It's just a building. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. The closing routine became muscle memory. Announce the warning at 8:45. Heard the last stragglers out by 9. Turn off the upstairs lights. Lock the side entrance. Check the bathrooms. Shut down the computers. Straighten chairs. And sign the logbook behind the desk. The logbook was bound in thick black leather with pale lines and neat dates. Mira had shown him where to sign. "Just initial," she said. "It's for the city. If anything happens, broken window, alarm, there's a record." Ethan did it without thinking. EC in the bottom corner. Every night, the same. Then, on the 22nd night, he found a book in the return slot that didn't belong. It wasn't dramatic at first. The return slot clanked softly as he dropped in a stack of late returns from the cart, and something in the slot caught his eye. A book with no barcode sticker, no library stamp,
no call number taped to the spine. The cover was simple, almost too simple. Black cloth, no title on the front, no author's name, just a faint embossed rectangle in the center, like a label that had been peeled away. He held it up under the library lamp. For a moment, he expected it to be a journal someone accidentally returned, or an old book from a personal collection. But the binding felt professionally made, the pages thick and slightly yellowed, the edges unfrayed. He opened it. The first page was blank. The second page was blank. He flipped deeper. Still blank. It wasn't until he reached somewhere near the middle that he saw faint writing, as if ink had soaked through from the other side of reality. Not printed, not typed. Handwritten. Small, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. If you're reading this, you've already stayed too long. Ethan stared at the sentence until it felt like it rearranged itself behind his eyes. He closed the book.
He told himself it was a prank, some teenager trying to be clever, sliding in a creepy blank notebook to mess with staff. Harrowfield had its share of bored kids and half-hearted troublemakers. Still, he looked around the empty library as if expecting someone to laugh. No one did. The overhead lights buzzed softly. The air vents sighed. The building waited. Ethan placed the book behind the desk and finished closing, quicker than usual. When he signed the logbook at the end of the night, his hand felt stiff. The pen scratched louder than it should have. Before leaving, he glanced once more at the strange returned book. He considered bringing it upstairs to Mira in the morning. Then he decided he didn't want it in his bag. He turned the key in the front door and stepped outside into the cold. He didn't lock eyes with the library windows. That night, Ethan dreamed he was shelving books in a library that had no end. The aisles stretched longer than they should. The ceiling drifted higher and higher until it disappeared. Every time he turned the corner, there were more shelves, more rows, more titles he couldn't read because the spines were blurred like faces in a crowd. He kept pushing a cart that became heavier as he went, filled with books that felt warm, as if they had just been held. In the dream, there was a whisper, not a voice, a page turning, again and again. He woke up at 3:12 a.m. with the taste of paper in his mouth. The next evening at work, Ethan told himself it was coincidence. He went straight to the desk drawer where he'd put the strange book. It wasn't there. He checked the shelf below the desk, the supply cabinet, under the chair. Nothing. Maybe Mira had found it and taken it. That made sense. She came in early. She would have dealt with odd returns. He wanted to feel relieved, but instead he felt as if something had been taken from him without permission. At 8:47, while he was making the final announcement, he noticed a man sitting in the reading area near the history section. Ethan hadn't seen him come in. The man was older, mid-60s maybe, with a heavy coat and hands folded neatly over a closed book. His posture was too still, like a photograph trying to pass as alive. Ethan approached, polite smile ready. "Sir, we're closing in about 10 minutes. The man's eyes lifted slowly. They weren't cloudy like Ethan expected. They were sharp, almost bright. Not friendly, but focused, like someone looking through glass. "I know," the man said.
His voice was quiet and dry. "You always say it at 8:45. Ethan's smile faltered. "Have we met?" The man glanced down at his book. He saw the cover. Black cloth, no title. Ethan's throat tightened. "I come when it's quiet. This is a quiet place. It helps you pretend." "Pretend what?" "That you're still on the right side of the desk." Ethan felt a sudden urge to step back, to create distance, but the carpet seemed to hold him in place. "Sir, I'll need you to check that book out or return it before you leave." The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I already returned it." Ethan didn't understand. He stood, moving stiffly as if his bones protested. He placed the black book on the table and leaned in just slightly. "Don't go into the basement," he said, "not unless you want to remember." Then he walked away, passing between shelves as if the library swallowed him. Ethan stood alone with the book. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the room. Against all common sense, he opened it again. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled, but not with a story, with names. Lines and lines of names, written in the same small, careful handwriting. Some had dates beside them. Some had little notes.
Stayed past closing. Brought in grief like a wet coat. Didn't want to go home. Thought the library would save them. Ethan flipped through the pages faster. Names he didn't recognize, then names he did. Harrison, Judy, reading corner, didn't speak for weeks. Little Miles, hid under the stairs, found later. Bishop, Trent, fell asleep in the archives. Ethan's stomach turned. The words were too specific, too intimate. And then, near the end, he found something that made the room tilt. Cole, Ethan, closing librarian, says he is lucky, says it's just a building. Under it, in darker ink, he hasn't remembered yet. The lights flickered. Not once, not like a normal power hiccup. They dimmed in a slow wave from the far end of the library, rolling toward him as if the darkness had a direction, a purpose. Ethan snapped the book shut. His hands were shaking. He looked toward the narrow hallway behind the desk, the one that led to the basement. The door was slightly open. It hadn't been. Ethan took a step back, then another. He told himself he didn't need to go down there. Mira had said not to. The old man had warned him too. But the thought of that sentence, "he hasn't remembered yet," hooked into him like a burr. The library didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt attentive. Ethan moved toward the door, slow, like a man walking toward a memory he'd tried to bury. The basement stairs creaked under his shoes. The air changed immediately, colder, damper. The smell of paper was stronger here, mingled with something faintly metallic, like old pennies. Motion lights clicked on one by one, but not fast enough. Shadows pooled in the corners between bursts of fluorescence. At the bottom of the stairs was a long corridor, lined with doors. Most were labeled with faded signs: archives, records, maintenance. Ethan swallowed and walked forward. He found the archives door first. It was unlocked. Inside, shelves ran along the walls, boxes stacked to the ceiling,
Folders, dust, old books that looked too tired to sit upright. A single desk sat in the center with a lamp, off but plugged in. Ethan's eyes caught on something on the desk. A logbook. Black leather, pale lines, the same kind as upstairs. He reached for it, fingers numb. He opened it. The page was dated. Not today. The date at the top read October 18th, 1999. Ethan's breath hitched. Beneath the date were initials, E.C. Over and over, every night, written in his own handwriting. But Ethan had been a kid in 1999. He'd been living in a different state. He remembered his mother's small apartment, the smell of cheap pizza, the TV always on. This couldn't be real. He flipped the pages. Years of entries, thousands, all EC. Then the final page. The date was blank, but the line beneath it read, "If you are still signing, you are still here."
Ethan felt his knees weaken. Behind him, the archives door eased shut with the soft click of a lock sliding into place. Ethan spun around and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. His throat tightened. "Hello?" he called, his voice too loud in the small room. The motion light outside the door flickered and went out. Darkness pressed against the thin gap at the bottom of the door. Ethan's breathing grew ragged. He turned back to the desk, desperate for logic, for explanation, for a way to frame this as stress or exhaustion or an elaborate prank. Then he saw the photo frame on the edge of the desk. He hadn't noticed it before. It faced down, like it was ashamed. Ethan lifted it. The photo showed the library's front desk, taken from the angle of the main entrance. The same lamp, the same brochure stand, the same sign about quiet hours. Behind the desk, there was a man smiling faintly, wearing a tie, holding a ring of keys. Ethan. But he looked wrong, older, paler, the skin around his eyes too thin, his smile too practiced. In the background, standing near the return slot, was Mira Vasquez, only younger, maybe in her 20s. Her expression wasn't brisk. It was terrified. Ethan's hands began to shake so violently the glass rattled in the frame. He set it down and stumbled backward. The archives lamp turned on by itself. A pool of warm light spread across the desk. Inside that circle of light, the black cloth book was waiting. Ethan hadn't brought it down. It lay open, pages fluttering as if a wind moved through them. And on the blank line near the end, new ink appeared, bleeding into existence slowly, like a bruise forming. Cole, Ethan, returned himself. Ethan's breath left him in a silent gasp. A whisper rose from the shelves, not words, not exactly, more like the sound of paper shifting, hundreds of pages inhaling at once. In that whisper, Ethan understood something he hadn't allowed himself to understand since the day his life split open. He didn't move to Harrowfield after the divorce. He moved here after the accident, the one he never let his mind touch. The rain, the headlights, the moment his car stopped making sense of the road. The phone call that never finished. The wet, crushing silence after impact. His hands gripping a steering wheel that wasn't there anymore.
Ethan staggered, holding his head like he could keep the memory from spilling out. "No," he whispered. The library didn't argue. It didn't need to. It merely held him like it held everything else left unfinished. Upstairs, far above the basement, the front doors stood locked. The windows reflected only dark shelves and empty chairs. The library was closed, and Ethan Cole, the closing librarian, stood in the archives like a bookmark left in the middle of a life that never got to its last page. The black cloth book's pages settled. Quiet returned. Outside, Harrowfield slept. Cars passed on the street. A dog barked once and then fell silent. And behind the desk, far away in a room that was both present and past, the logbook waited for a signature that had already been written. Because in Harrowfield Public Library, the dead didn't haunt the living. They simply checked themselves out and forgot to return.